Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back. Just Christina here. Today I'm going to do the first video of two videos that I want to present a list of 39 chemicals, various chemicals and bioagents. This is a list that comes from various sources, reputable sources, including Harvard and the Navy, and a lot of them are actually heard in common discussion regarding various compound cocktails that are being sprayed on us at any given time. So we don't know what any specific chemical is included in the aerosolization application, although we can get a pretty good idea based on knowing more about the chemicals and determining with the power of observation what color the clouds are and how we are feeling. So a lot of these studies that I have conducted from various resources come from my university library and other scholarly internet resources. But the compound and structural chemical compositions themselves I found at PubChem. It's a site like PubMed, but obviously for chemicals instead. So the 39 chemicals I have, I'm going to do the first, I'd say 18 or 19. We'll get through them fairly quickly. So without any further distractions, let's start reviewing what they are actually spraying on us. First on everyone's favorite list to talk about is aluminum oxide particles. It's a nano aluminum oxide particle. It has a very strong interatomic bond. And what this means is they're using it as a refractory and a binary agent. It also has a lot of effects on humans and the biomass, just in general. A lot of studies have been done on aluminum oxide particles, and one way that they actually measure it in biomass for levels of pulmonary toxicity, what they do is something called bronchoalveolar lavage. It's essentially a lung washing. They literally take a tube and they put it in your nose or your throat, put a little water in your lungs, extract it back out, and measure the contaminant levels found in your lungs. So it causes a lot of pulmonary and cardio problems with people, but it also really, really strongly affects our crops. And here's why. Aluminum itself in the soil is bound. It does not affect the crops or anything growing around it. It's not capable of being absorbed into the roots of the plants. But when it's extracted and mined and then aerosolized and sprayed onto the surface of the soil, that loose, unbound aluminum is very easily absorbed by the roots of the crops, and it stunts them horribly. So now we're finding that we're barely getting, maybe an inch or two of root growth, whereas formerly a healthy, uncontaminated plant would have, a foot or two of root growth that branches out. So this barely provides a bumper crop at best, if anything at all. And this is a problem for farmers. So one way that they tried to combat this, Monsanto, now Bayer, of course, they developed an aluminum resistant seed strain to counteract the problems of increased aerosolized aluminum found in the soil. And 10 or 15 years ago, we were seeing maybe 300 parts per million of this loose, unbound aluminum. And it wasn't such a highly toxic level. It wasn't a problem yet. But nowadays, we're seeing at any given level in those same fields 80,000 to 100,000 parts per million of loose, unbound aluminum in the soil. And that is definitely a problem for crops. So where does it come from? Well, the chemtrails can't be the only source of this, and they're not. It's mostly contaminants from crop dusting, from the fertilizers and the chemicals that farmers are using on their fields, and it stays on the surface of the soil. It leaches into the waters nearby, the lakes, the rivers, and eventually it makes its way back to the ocean. So it is literally a planetary problem. All right, next on the list is arsenic. This is another one, atomic number 33, found on the periodic table. In its raw form, it's like a crystalline structure. And yes, we can find it naturally in the earth, but biologically, inside our bodies, it binds to sulfur and it causes horrible, horrible health problems. The damage is continuous. If we just keep ingesting arsenic over and over, it binds to the phosphate in our bodies, which it basically wreaks havoc on the very backbones of our DNA structures. This basically means that it binds to the outside structure of the DNA, and it binds to that sugar phosphate binding right there. So this causes everything from skin reactions, eye problems, lung complications, and so much more. We can find arsenic even in the United States. It is a result of mining, geothermal pumping operations, and it's found in aquifers all over the world. But there are some high levels in the United States. Look, here's the USGS map that just it shows the higher levels of arsenic found in our own country. So how, with food, the easiest way to prevent high levels of arsenic, it's not from not eating rice or certain foods where arsenic is found naturally in those foods, which is actually found in the hull. That's why you don't eat the hull of the rice, you just eat the rice, um, with the seed inside of the hull. But it comes from the water that we're preparing those foods with. So if you're getting water from an aquifer that has a high level of arsenic, it doesn't matter what you're preparing with it. It's just the fact that you're constantly boiling the arsenic into any food that you're making. And it's this dosage of arsenic that makes it toxic. It exists in large concentrations all over our country, but of course, you never hear about it. So, next on the list of alphabetical death soup is bacilli and molds. So, why would anyone spray mold on us? Seriously. Well, first of all, bacillus or taxonomic bacteria, it's like bacilli or cocci or any of those individual bacteria particulates. And you probably recognize some infectious bacterium like pneumococcal or staphylococcal structures. Basically, bacillus has a restriction enzyme in it, and that's why I think it's used. So, what is that? Well, in labs, it's regularly used for transferring DNA from one cell to another. So, basically, this enzyme is used in biolabs to create new viruses and genetic clones. And just to read a basic description of a restriction enzyme for better reference, a restriction enzyme is a type of endonuclease, an enzyme which functions to cleavage the nucleotide sequence in between the DNA strand, but the site of cleavage is specific for the restriction endonuclease. In the DNA, there are some specific sequences that are present termed as recognition and restriction sequences. So again, what the heck does this mean? Well, ultimately, it splices the DNA structure to allow another binary bacteria to bind to the DNA that it's severed or spliced. I just want to be as clear as possible here because I want you to understand how these chemicals and biological structures affect our bodies. So quickly already, we have covered toxic metals affecting our lungs, a very common slow killer that destroys our DNA, a DNA splicer that allows the bacteria to attack the cells more readily. We are barely skimming the surface here. So next comes the bariums, barium salt and barium titanates. So they're more commonly mentioned when we reference chemical aerosolization, and here's why. Well, barium is very, very toxic. It's alkali. It's part of those 6 groupings in the periodic table that include the group 2 elements, I think they are. And they include some other chemicals that you might recognize too, like calcium and magnesium, but also beryllium, radium, and strontium, which are also on our list. And those are the toxic ones. So some of them are found inside our own bodies, yes, but on the flip side, the last 3 aforementioned are very bad. So why would they possibly want to spray this air assault on us? Well, the barium salt significantly affects the atmosphere and the human body. So basically, salt gives the water or moisture the ability to carry an electrical charge. And the way this works in the body, the cell itself is 50% chemical, 50% electrical. And it's this this exchange of this electrical circuit that keeps the cells rotating very, very rapidly. And it's how cells talk to each other. So they're constantly rotating and they're constantly going back and forth and making this exchange and opening. And they have the action phase and the resting phase. And they're constantly, constantly, very quickly talking to each other. And it is this chemical electrical response in our bodies that is vital to a healthy cell structure. So when you're interrupting that, of course, there's a lot of problems that come with it. Barium atomic number 56, it is it's known to considerably increase the frequency of heart attacks in older people. When mixed with strontium, it's used in dielectric materials for ceramic capacitors, piezoelectric materials for microphones and other transducers. It's that chalky white coating. But in the sky, it looks yellow. So the bariums are just as deadly and toxic as high levels of arsenic. And it's mined largely in India. You can find it. It's readily available for things like capacitors and fireworks and ceramics, hence ceramides, bleach, and even glass. But the one issue remains: it can be so toxic that it can cause paralysis or just death. And you wouldn't drink arsenic and bleach punch, so why would you possibly want to inhale this powder? Barium is very, very toxic, but still, it acts as a conductor. I wouldn't call it a superconductor because no pun intended, but it's a wonderful conductor. And I personally believe it's been added not only as a way to conduct electricity, but perhaps a benefit to the Internet of Things and the 5G changes that are coming up, because barium fluoride is also known as an optic or infrared enhancer. Okay, moving on. The three C's on the list are cadmium, chromium, and calcium. So I'm going to try and fly through these to not waste as much time as possible. First of all, cadmium, the atomic number 48, it's very widely known in many forms of industry. We use it as a plating alloy, copier drums, batteries, fluorescent screens. I think even in the aircraft industry, it's used for some things. It's used as a barrier to control neutrons during the nuclear fission process. But exposure to cadmium can lead to a variety of problems, including cancer. Acute inhalation exposure or high levels over a short period of time to cadmium can result in like flu-like symptoms, chills, fever, muscle pains, things like that, but it very seriously damages your lungs. It's present in atmospheric conditions as white or a bluish tint, so that's something to look for. Okay, next, chromium. So this one is mostly used in stainless steel, but it's also used in things like shampoo, so it gives us that lustrous shine. Anyway, the problem with chromium is that it's toxic, and I know some people use it as a health supplement, but just because it's green doesn't mean it's good for you. It's used as a pigment for paint, but it's very irritating, and it can cause lung problems too, even cell mutations, so hence cancer. So it's possibly another carcinogenic chemical aiding in lung cancer, but basically, because it can be converted into a thermide, it's a good transistor. And I'm presuming that because of the properties involved here, it's actually used for something called resistive thermal evaporation, essentially causing some of these other non-soluble metallic particulates to actually evaporate. Okay, calcium is the last one in the roster of C. So we know calcium well. Calcium carbonate is listed as a key chemical component because the white chalky substance is a refractor. Basically, the chalky dust is meant to do just that, block the sun by means of refraction. So, getting into the only letter D on the list, this one is actually really gross. I have a hard time talking about this one because it's desiccated human red blood cells. Barf, right? So why is this? Who the heck thought that it was a good binary agent? You win the award for mad scientist. That's not a good title. So anyway, desiccated human red blood cells are and frozen red blood cells are both used, but the desiccated red blood cells are a better binary agent with oxygen. Um, it's basically the perfect binary agent. So I won't get too deeply into the antigen and antibody stability ratios, but it holds its binding and uh, abilities at ambient temperatures for up to 2 weeks and can actually be stored for years in a glycerol solution. So when it's thawed, that's the frozen human red blood cells now. When it's thawed and you remove the glycerol, then they have what they need is this binary catalyst. And perhaps your body recognizes the components because it's natural. Remember those DNA splicers we were talking about? So, yeah, this allows the bacteria more easily to attach to the host. I'm not really sure. There's not much out there in way of viable report with pertinent enough information to cover, but there's a lot of claims being presented. So I'm not really sure what to say about this one, desiccated human red blood cells. But one thing I do think of when I consider how easy it is for the other pathogens to attach to the host based on the DNA splicing, um, I just think that this is kind of an insurance enhancer that they actually take. So, of course, some soil samples out there report finding these consistently high and elevated levels of desiccated human red blood cells in their samples. Okay, this one is just making me ill. So moving on. Ethylene dibromide. It's naturally occurring. It's a chemical found as a reaction in our oceans. Um, it's found in algae, hence toxic algae. It's toxic. Any bromide really is not good for you. It's another binary agent, but we find it in production for things like waxes, resins, gums, and it's even used to make vinyl bromide. It's also used in leaded gas to prevent your engine from knocking. But the big issue is that it's a major skin irritant and it can cause depression and other neurological disorders like schizophrenia. So, one other thing that I really want to talk about with ethylene dibromide and bromides in general, they are bad for you, but they are regulated by the FDA and you can find them in some foods like your citric sodas. All you Mountain Dew addicts out there, guess what you are drinking? Don't do the do. Do and die. Don't drink Mountain Dew. It's bad for you. So again, I reference PubMed and PubChem and the reports, all the reports that I found talk about these bromides in various stages and various chemical formations. It is very toxic. It's a great binary agent. It's used in fumigants for Japanese tree beetles, which I thought was interesting. But it's even used on crops for soil fungus prevention. Common exposure, well, it can't include death, but it's absorbed readily through your skin and it's inhaled. So that's the most common form of poisoning, but you can get it various ways. Causes loss of appetite, rapid breathing, vomiting, diarrhea. There are a lot of deaths associated with accidental inhalation. And also, it's known in lab testing to have severely altered liver and kidney functions in lab rats. So, this is a really, really bad one, but bromides are present commonly. Causes tumors in your organs, your glands, like thyroid tumor, liver and kidney tumors, like I talked about before, but adrenal glands, spleen, pancreas, even lung tumors. So again, toxic, but fortunately for humanity, it has a very, very low half-life, and it needs a very cold temp to leach into the water. So you chill that Mountain Dew, and it's even worse for you at a lower temperature. In rivers, it lasts about a day. Lakes, it lasts about 5 days. And like I said, it's in fuel too. So the emissions that are being distributed into the air particulates, um, it can last a lot longer, up to 45 days, but it breaks down very readily in the sunlight and the moisture. So things like sun, rain, wind, and all those other natural elements break it down much faster. Again, the question, why is it used? Why is it present in chemtrails? Well, this one I think actually is a byproduct of jet fuel. It's present in all aviation discharge, chemtrails and contrails. So it's actually found in the chemtrail list by proxy. It's an emission from the jet fuel. Um, so next, Enterobacter cloacae. This is another rod-shaped bacteria. It's a very simple, easy biological way to allow the pathogens found within the entire chemical cocktail to bind better to the human form. It's widely found in wastewater, like urine and fecal matter in the water, and it's from across species. This bacteria comes from humans and animals. And I think one of the most common things that we recognize about it, it's in the gamma protobacteria, which is a huge class of bacteria. Some of these bacteria are responsible for really horrible but common things that we recognize, like salmonella, lower respiratory tract infections, skin rashes. And it's one of those bacterias, although we can treat it, ironically, it's most readily obtained or contracted, I guess, by being hospitalized. So it's very common in hospitals, and it's from not washing your hands. So wash your hands. It's pretty resistant to antibiotics too. It's kind of gross. But still, why is it sprayed? Well, like I said, it's one of the 4 resistant to antibiotic bacteria that are out there that can survive really harsh conditions. You know MRSA, right? Well, same class, but tons of scholarly articles on this, and I think you should read them only if you dare. So, very similarly related is the Enterobaceae. It's a common class of bacterium like E. coli, Shigella, gastroenteritis, meningitis. Um, Even some infections like wound infections and pneumonia. It's a very mobile bacteria, it likes to move around. The enterobacterial infection basically goes around and ferments the sugars, and it causes like an acid reaction. It wreaks havoc in your body. And I believe it's being sprayed because it does affect the white blood cells, which we'll see later on the list, but I think it's next. But basically, it performs the same cellular cleavage or divide like we found in the red blood cells. And I believe that, as we see with the white blood cells, it includes that splicing replacement, which is a little more scary because as a genetic altering component, splicing or replacing this cellular structure can cause all kinds of autoimmune disorders. So again, correlation is not causation, of course, but there's still strong presence to the state of these bacterial effects, chemical effects, solvents, and other biological agents. And yes, next on the list is human white blood cells. So like we discussed, the cells in our bodies are altered by the bacterial infection present. And I believe the white blood cells are present to act as the same binary catalyst like an insurance policy in the red blood cell scenario. So I won't touch too much more on this one. We know what red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are. It's like elementary biology 101. So now we're going to talk about some more elements. The next one is lead. Lead, as you know, is very toxic, and it causes blood poisoning at high levels. There's a lot of uses in industry. There's lead vests, there's lead doors, lead pipes, and we know that it's toxic now, and we're trying to correct the error of our ways, but there's still a lot of lead poisoning from lead toxicity from, the cities that haven't changed their water systems yet. Um, Lead is aerosolized, and the tests that were conducted and sprayed from high altitude in these chemtrails, um, the air quality tests still did readouts that were stating the lead toxicity was present at like 8.2 parts per million in the study. And that's from high altitude. So who knows how significantly concentrated it is when they're going over, back and forth, and it just fills the air. Lead, of course, is an atomic element. It's number 82. It's a fun atomic abbreviation. It's PB, no J, just PB. Anyway, we know the horror stories about lead pipes and brain problems in kids, but the obvious one is the radiation shield. It's an aerosolization refraction agenda. Basically, it literally blocks out the sun, but it's toxic. So next, bear with me here, we're only going to do a couple more, and we're going to talk about lithium salts. Lithium is one that we are very, very well aware of, and we know that it's used to treat bipolar depression and mania. Let's see, what do I want to say about lithium? Lithium salts perhaps are sprayed, I guess, if you will, as a lithium ion, as a mood stabilizer for bipolar disorder, but it's discerning because you can even get lithium listed on Amazon that's sold as a natural mood enhancer. And I'm not even kidding, it's horrible. But lithium does treat these manic episodes for bipolar disorder, but it causes hyperactivity, rushed speech, poor judgment, the reduced need for sleep, aggression. Ultimately, it's the perfect doping agent, but it's on the verge of being unstable. It has over 625 known drug interactions, including oxygen. So, yeah, lithium, there's a lot to be said about it, and I strongly encourage you to research it more. But in a manner of speaking, it is very highly soluble. The lithium ion salt, which, like is in batteries, it's a great conductor. Ask NASA, they've already admitted to spraying it on us. So lithium ions are found in the atmosphere. And okay, let's fly through the M's and then we'll take a break, okay? The next chemical is mercury, the same stuff that we used to break the thermometers and play with in our hands when we were kids. Now if they find out that you have mercury on your block, they'll shut down the whole block. Mercury's atomic number is 80. On the periodic table, it's represented as Hg. It's in the zinc group, and it's pretty remarkable. It has a lot of uses, from medical devices to switches, relays, and it's even what gives bulbs that bluish glow. So mercury is so purposeful on so many levels, but let's talk about why I relate it to chemtrails. It's actually relevant to the fact that it's a stable coolant in nuclear reactors. It's a coolant. That's just it. It's a planetary coolant. Methyl aluminum. So we talked a lot about aluminum already, but methyl aluminum is simply another binary agent. Comes with a hefty explosive warning too. It's toxic to your respiratory system when it's inhaled, and ultimately it's aluminum, but under high temps and low pressure, it binds to these three different methyl groups, and it makes another refractory coolant. And it should be noted that it was patented in like 1960. It's used in a very, very wide variety of daily things, everything from medication to bakeware. So the next one and the last one are coupled together, and these are mold spores and mycoplasmas. Essentially, they're mycotoxins. So basically what we've studied from the application in biological weapons, it causes disease and death. Um, it's found in mold infested homes. These mold spores, this is the kind of deadly mold that we're talking about. And it's very, very antibiotic resistant. So when you get it in your lungs, you can't just take antibiotics to kill it internally. Why is this? Because, well, interestingly enough, that bacteria does not have a cell wall. And part of the antibiotic action is to break down the cell wall. So you would expect to see this with pneumonia and all kinds of other respiratory problems. And the variations of these bacterial infections can be very, very widespread. So you could just keep getting recurring problems and side effects from it. And there's a lot of different mycoplasma conditions as variants, like headaches, ringing in the ears, mental confusion, lung cancer, and other cancers, Parkinson's disease, ALS. And it sucks because I've seen people more and more suffering from these things. My friend's dad and my next door neighbor passed from ALS, and my dad is suffering from very, very serious, debilitating Parkinson's. And it's scary to watch people have to go through this. And I think it comes just from the spray that we're breathing in daily, compounded over time. So again, these mycoplasmas are identifiable by the colors in the clouds. You know those reddish tinted clouds? It's not red blood cells, my friends. It's actually yellow fungal mycotoxins. So I'd like to close this first part of the video by saying that although more studies are needed to confirm, the studies conducted so far on morgellons are linked to these toxic spores. Okay, thanks for joining me for the first part. Stay tuned for part two. It's going to come very soon. I'd like to have it done by tomorrow. Um, when we get everything covered, we'll be talking more about aluminum-coated fiberglass, more about these yellow fungal mycotoxins, and about 14 more chemicals on the list of known chemical toxins and elements and other bioagents that are being sprayed on us right now. So solar engineering or something more nefarious. Thanks for joining me. Just Christina, signing out.